Hey there, friends. Interesting video for you guys today. Several of you have sent me emails and messages regarding an issue in Alabama where they passed constitutional carry, but one of the local sheriffs over there actually is trying to undo that based on the issue of crime in the area and trying to place an age limit on there. Now, I was fortunate enough to contact this sheriff. This is Sheriff Paul Birch from the Mobile County area, and he was kind enough to sit down with me and have a conversation online, of course. I want to play a news source first that explains the situation, you guys, and then we'll go right into my interview with the sheriff.
Alabama became a permitless carry state in January of last year. Since then, some officials across the state said they've seen an increase in gun-related crimes. Here in Mobile County, Sheriff Paul Birch says there's been 171 gun-related charges since 2022 for those under the age of 20, with 47 of those being 17 years old or younger. That comes out to about one gun crime every 6.5 days. Sheriff Birch is asking legislators to consider amending the law to require those under 21 years old to have a permit.
If they were required to have a permit, then, if they didn't have one and were in possession of the guns, then they could be arrested for it, and we could prevent a lot of these crimes, at least with those particular weapons that they have.
State Representative Shane Stringer, who sponsored the bill in 2022, says he doesn't feel like that would help.
You don't reach 21 and automatically, magically have maturity, so I don't think that it's going to have any major effect.
The bill has some provisions for law enforcement to ask about a gun if they have reasonable suspicion of a crime. But Sheriff Birch says that can be interpreted in different ways.
Reasonable suspicion is certainly an element that you can investigate a little further, but it doesn't give you the ability to arrest someone. You have to have probable cause for an arrest.
Hey guys, I'm here with Sheriff Paul Birch from the Mobile County Sheriff's Department in Alabama, and there are some interesting things going on over there. We do a lot of reporting on constitutional carry, obviously. And in the state of Alabama, they actually passed constitutional carry. And now there's a little bit of debate going on about whether or not that law needs to be tweaked a little bit. And I've got with me Sheriff Paul Birch, who is on a different side of this argument, if you want to call it an argument. And he's got various reasons why. Sheriff Birch, first of all, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you joining me on this Friday morning. I know it's nasty weather outside and you still took the time to join us. So very much appreciate that, sir.
No problem.
So what I want to talk about first, and this is just to set up the viewers to understand what you are dealing with in Montgomery County. And again, I'm not trying to sway the audience. I want them to understand, I guess, what you are dealing with as sheriff of that area. Your area down there, tell me what the areas that probably have the worst crime in your area in Mobile County, what would those cities be?
The city of Mobile, but they have a fair number of resources to be able to address the problem. And then the city of Pritchard is where we're really seeing a lot of problems. Pritchard's a small community that's a lot of crime. A very, very small department that has its own problems. We just arrested a Pritchard police officer 2 days ago. And, it's riddled with drug crime, violent crime. And where it affects the entire county is these individuals retreat to Pritchard because it's a safe haven for them, but they're committing crimes all throughout the county. And what I'm concerned with is the violent crimes involving firearms.
Right. Interesting about the Pritchard whole thing. We'll talk about that here in a second. I did pull some stats up regarding Mobile, and interesting. I'm sure you know all these way better than I do. If you look online, you can find a lot of crime stats and things like that as far as violence and things happening in various areas across the country. And it says you have a 1 in 25 chance of violent or property crime in Mobile. And again, to be fair to you, you've not been sheriff there for what, a year now? How long have you been sheriff there?
Almost 2 years.
2 years. Okay. So in Alabama, 92% of the other communities outside of Mobile have a lower crime rate, which makes me wonder, what are the other 8% that have a higher crime rate than Mobile? And if you look nationwide, Mobile is in the top 100 in the 100 most dangerous cities in America. So I want people to understand what you guys locally are dealing with. this is a problem. And again, I'm not trying to relieve you of any responsibility, but you did kind of inherit this. This didn't happen in the last 2 years since you became sheriff. What do you think the primary causes are for that area having such a high crime rate compared to not only Alabama, but the rest of the country?
There are a number of factors involved. Over the course of several years, the city of Mobile has demolished and relocated people from public housing and spread them throughout the community, all throughout the county, different municipalities. And so they've decentralized, where a lot of these families have grown up generationally, and they formed their own little gangs. And I will say, I'm sure I'll get some blowback from it, but for many, many years, Mobile, and I say Mobile, I'm referring to the city, has denied that there's a gang problem. And, they have finally acknowledged within the last year or two that there's a significant gang problem, and that's the issues we're facing. And these people are typically, under the age of 21 years old, all the way down to 13, 14 years old that we've arrested for shootings. And so that's
When,
that.
when you, excuse me one second, when you say
Yeah.
they are finally recognizing the gang problem, are you talking about local officials there?
Yeah, the city of Mobile. Yeah.
Okay. So interesting about the proliferation of people by taking down that housing and scattering them about the area. And I don't know any other way to describe that, but that's interesting because I've seen that in other communities too. That's never a good thing. I mean, from a law enforcement standpoint, I've got law enforcement friends who tell me the same thing, that whenever you have your folks who are the criminal element, and this has nothing to do with race, culture, anything like that. We're talking about criminals. Whenever most of them are housed in one generalized area, whether it's a part of town or a high rise or something like that, it's a whole lot easier to wrap your hands around it than it is whenever they're scattered throughout the entire city, because they obviously stay in communication with one another. So they're all still out there. They're just now scattered throughout the entire area.
That's a very accurate depiction of what's going on. And not only was it easier to go get your hands on individuals when they commit a crime, it was a lot easier to monitor, activities through intelligence and such. But a couple times, mistakenly, the first time you mentioned Montgomery, Montgomery County and Jefferson County, which is just north of Montgomery County, are seeing a lot worse problems than what we are in Mobile County. I mean, that they've, the city of Montgomery is in such disarray that, they've been pushing the sheriff there to basically take over the city and run law enforcement. And so, that's part of that other 8%
Yeah.
that you were talking about.
No, you're exactly right. And let's be honest. I mean, we keep our eye on a lot of the news, and especially I'm here in Louisiana. So in the South, I keep my ear to the ground on a lot of that, but we pay particular attention to, since so many of the quote mass shootings are mischaracterized as mass shootings whenever they're usually gang related and shootouts between people slinging dope or arguing and there's a confrontation or something like that. Montgomery is in the news quite often when it comes to quote mass shootings. Now we know they're not mass shootings. It's not a guy walking into a Wendy's shooting at people indiscriminately. These are rival gangs shooting at each other. So to your point, Montgomery certainly consumes the headlines a lot more than what I see. I was actually surprised that Mobile had the crime rate that it did, to be quite honest with you. I had not heard that from a national level because I think Montgomery dominates the news so much because of their higher crime rate.
Well, and back to Jefferson County, their numbers are so significant that, when somebody gets shot there, it don't even really make the news anymore.
What are the larger towns in Jefferson County?
Birmingham.
Okay.
And then you've got a lot of, suburbs that have become, municipalities, and just to kind of lay out a little bit about Mobile, we're barely the second largest sheriff's office in the state and have the largest jail in the state. So, and due to tornadoes and such in the other counties, we house inmates, from various counties, for different crimes. We've got, Selma, which is just south of Montgomery. We've got 21 of their inmates, mostly for capital murder, and we call them the Selma 20. And So, our jail's probably, it is the biggest. It's probably one of the worst as far as the element, that are detained over there.
I would imagine being on that I-10 corridor doesn't help a whole lot either.
No.
Well, let's talk about the story that I just ran. This is what, from my standpoint, especially with where you are, most sheriffs see things a little bit differently. I will say this: I've had opposition with some sheriffs here in Louisiana who have spoken out before we passed our constitutional carry. You may or may not know, but this July 4th, it went into effect in Louisiana for constitutional carry, and there are no age requirements in the state of Louisiana either. Those age requirements in Louisiana were pushed at the state level, state house level, during the debate about whether or not we implement constitutional carry, but they were not, it wasn't added as part of it. So we have, very similar to what you guys have in Alabama, where 18 on up can constitutional carry. You are in favor of, and if I misspeak, please correct me, because I don't want to mischaracterize your stance on this, but you're in favor of amending that law that allows anyone from 18 on up to constitutional carry. And you have your reasons based on crime and what you see. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and what I've said during various news interviews, all I'm asking for is a discussion, to see what we can do to address, the issues we're seeing. And through that, I thought one, potential remedy would be, looking solely at data, requiring a permit for those under the age of 21. Now, under the age of 18, it's illegal for them to possess it anyway. So this really only affects 18 to 20. And, and it excludes military, active and reserve, people working in public safety, because they've had training and have gone through backgrounds. So, and I try to stress, we're not looking at this from the perspective of a college student on the way to school or, a young person on the way to work. We're looking at scenarios where, you've got a carload of 4 or 5 people riding around at 2 o'clock in the morning, all of them have guns. They're obviously not going to work or school. And so what are they doing?
But to be fair, if a law was amended to disallow those folks from 18 to 20 carrying, that still would affect those college students going to school or somebody going to work.
It could, absolutely. This law is no different than any other law on the books. Discretion is always at the, mercy of the officer doing the interaction. Any crime short of murder or a Class A felony, there's some discretion there, and common sense should come into play. And that's the scenario I'm given a lot as well. What if I leave my gun in, my son's car, something like that? I would hope that most law enforcement officers would have some common sense and verify what was being said and, let the guy go or girl, whoever it is.
But let's put it this way, and from a non-law enforcement standpoint, which is where I stand, I look at all laws as being absolute. In other words, if I'm breaking the law, I'm breaking the law. I'm not going to hope and wish for your deputies to have discretion when they pull me over if I'm breaking the law, and allow me to get out of that charge because I'm on my way to school and you believe me. Technically, I'm breaking the law. If that officer is having a bad day or has an attitude, he can charge me for that, even if I was under the impression that, oh, well, he's going to understand that I'm going to college. Do you follow what I'm saying? I mean, that would be.
I do. And that goes to what, if you look at most crimes, there's some kind of element of intent. And again, and there are ways, back when permits were required, an 18-year-old could get a permit if they had written letters from their parents, and I think it required a school teacher, school principal, somebody to say that they're in good character, and that that could be looked at again. And so I see both sides of that. I truly do. But I'm faced with over 400 to 500 violent crimes with firearms committed by people under the age of 21 just in the last couple of years.
Now, as far as I understand your point about what you're saying about the young people, I'm always going to have this stand that when you focus on, there can't be more criminals than good people, right? I would have to believe that in your area, there has to be more good people who are following the law. I'm talking about even 18 to 20-year-olds who are
Sure.
following the law than those who are breaking the law. I mean, you understand my position that it disenfranchises those the majority of them that would fall under, they would still, again, they'd be waiting on or hoping for your officer's discretion to let them off when they're breaking the law versus that other small percentage of it. Even though it's a higher crime rate, it's still a very small percentage of that age group population out there that would be the cause of the law being changed. But certainly you affect this much larger group who's done nothing wrong.
Again, I see both sides of it, and one of the things I said too is, if an amendment would be considered, it would be at no cost. There wouldn't be a charge, for the permit. And, it's just something has to happen to be able for us to address the crimes that we're seeing. And again, I get asked a lot, why am I even taking this position? Because I'm not having the problems per se in the county. These are municipalities that are seeing the problems, but I feel responsible for every citizen of Mobile County, regardless what municipality they're in.
Well, and I don't necessarily support the position of age requirements, and I have my reasons for that, obviously. But is that, I'm just asking a question like a devil's advocate here. Is that something that can be implemented from a county standpoint? Again, I don't support it, but is that something that can be implemented from a county level and not state level?
No, because we operate solely on state law. We
Okay.
don't have ordinances or anything like that.
Okay, I
You know,
follow you.
and a difference probably between you and I and some of the, I guess, people that we're seeing involved in these type of crimes. You and I probably had parents and grandparents who taught us responsible gun ownership, responsible how to properly use and handle a gun. Where what we're dealing with are those who are out here stealing guns and or getting them from wherever, who have no familiarization, whatever. They just get a gun and start carrying it,
Well,
and that's there's a big difference there.
no, and I agree with you. In fact, that's a note that I had here for a second. We'll address that now. Something that I wanted to bring up with you. And I see this. This is certainly not in your area. This is every crime-ridden area across the country. It boils down to two things, and it's always two things: parenting and local, quote, mentors and community leaders. The parenting, if you look at the numbers, we break down, quote, mass shooting numbers across the country every single month. Every time the Gun Violence Archive comes out with their erroneous numbers, we break them down to show what the real problem is. Unfortunately, they'll throw all these gang-related shootings, even domestic shootings and things like that into the mass shootings. We break them out because we want to show where the problem is. Like, if you can't fix the problem if you don't know what the root cause of that problem is. We could blame guns all day long, but we know that's not the actual problem. So in our research, we've certainly found that parenting and community leaders are probably the biggest problem that we have these days. Not saying that some people are just inherently bad. I do believe some people may just be bad. But I also believe with zero leadership from the home, lot of single parent homes, you're dealing with an element there that you probably have anywhere between 80 and 90% of the homes are fatherless, at least single parent, but most of them are fatherless homes. So there's not a father figure there anyway. And community leaders also, they get up there and talk about all the things that we need to do, but you never really see them try to bring these young people in and try to mentor them and make them understand things, understanding that they do have fatherless homes in many cases. They're still not attempting to do anything to help these young people. So these young people have no leadership. The only peers that they have that are mentors are the people that got them into the gang. That's who they're following, unfortunately. So I see what you're up against, obviously. I know that, boy, it's an uphill battle. I understand where you're coming from. But again, I look at things like this, and I know you probably will agree with this, because I think you and I agree with a lot of the same things in many cases. I look at, okay, one thing that's also very, very high numbers is young single mothers. That 18, 19-year-old single mother, what if she's from a family where her parents don't approve of her being pregnant at a young age, right? Well, she has to move out. Well, guess what? Now she has very little money, if any. She might be state sponsored and getting government funding to live in a house somewhere. What kind of housing is she going to live in? A low income housing, right? In the areas that are
Not a
bad.
safety.
That's right. So now you have this single mother who doesn't have much money. She's forced to live, and I say forced. I know she's not forced, but she doesn't have many options. So she moves into this low income area that already has high crime. Well, guess what? She's 18, 19 years old. She might be one of those ones that's like, I'm a rule follower. I'm not going to just go get a gun illegally and carry it on myself because that's not something I'm willing to do. But, and you mentioned free. I didn't know that you were offering or you were proposing this as free, because that was going to be one of my questions to you. If I have this young mother that wants to protect herself and her newborn child, she's already doesn't have much money. So she's not going to have the additional money to pay for that permit. So it's good to hear you saying that. I just have a real problem with carving out a class of people who are allowed to do everything else as adults, but we say there are some things that they can't do as an adult. We let them vote, we let them go into the military. Heck, you could probably, I don't know, you could probably hire one, right? You could hire a 19, 20-year-old
Oh,
in the sheriff's
absolutely.
department, right?
I went into the military at 17. So, I mean,
Right.
that's, again, I truly see both sides of it. And I'm just looking for a remedy. And contrary to some of the headlines that went out, I'm not trying to lead any effort to repeal the law or anything like that.
Mhm.
I'm just asking for discussion to see if this is a viable, remedy till we can get this under control. And because it's a tool, nothing more than a tool to be able to
Yeah.
get thugs off the street. Again, I'm not talking about college students or working, I'm talking thugs who are riding around up to no good.
Right. I'm curious, are there any other laws that are in place that, to your example earlier, if you have four guys riding around who are 18, 19 years old and they all have guns and they get pulled over, is there anything else that you would see, like from a probable cause standpoint? Is there, and I will say this, before you answer, I also look at it like if you've committed no crime yet, you're still not a criminal, so you've done nothing wrong and you shouldn't be arrested. So at what point do you have a tool on your own that maybe those four people running around with guns who you assume they're up to no good, is there anything else that you can levy at them instead of saying that, oh, you have a gun, so automatically you go to jail?
Well, no, well, that's partially a good scenario. Where that would apply is if it's a simple traffic violation, then and no underlying crime that can be determined to go further, then all you can do right now is just say have a good night. You can see the guns, under the waistband. Now, the flip side of that, let's just say if permits were required in that age group, then you can, inquire, do you have a permit for that gun on your waistband? Because two of them are probably convicted felons. But you don't know that, because you can't go any further if it's just a straight up traffic stop for, let's say, expired tag, whatever. And if there's no reason to go any further, you can see the guns, but you can't run them, to see if they're stolen. Can't inquire about the occupant's background or anything. Just write a ticket and let them go. And so that's kind of scenarios where it's a tool to, take some of those individuals responsible for these crimes and be able to arrest them and hopefully prevent, future more serious crimes. And so that's kind of, when the law was passed here, it was the debate that it was presented that patrol officer could run an NCIC check on the side of the road to see if the person's a convicted felon. That was an absolute lie. And to run an NCIC check, and this is anywhere in the country, you have to physically go to the office, fill out a form, indicate why you're running it, because this is someone's background run nationally. And there has to be a legitimate reason, investigation, active case, whatever. And you sign your name to that under, criminal perjury charges if you lie. And then you have to sign for the report when it comes back. That can't be done on the side of the road.
Right.
But it was presented in such a way, leading others to believe it could be. Now, when I say there, I'm talking about the legislature. remedy for that was create a state database for prohibited persons. It took a lot longer to get that up and running, than we were originally told. And it still has a lot of errors in it. We've arrested several people who should have been in the database and was not, that were, had multiple felony convictions. But fortunately, in those instances, they were involved in other crimes where we ran a criminal history and determined that they were convicted felons. And some of them we just knew were convicted felons because we sent them to prison before.
How long has your law been in place for constitutional carry?
It was signed in 22. It went into effect January of 23.
So this database that they're building is pretty much a work in progress, you would say?
It is, and I take that into consideration too. And and even the law, I'm not saying it's a totally bad law in the way that it's written, but it could be tweaked in there's some real ambiguous language in there that even lawyers don't understand it. And you can ask 5 different lawyers and get 5 different opinions. And because it was thrown together and rushed through, and I think a lot more thought should have gone into the law itself and the elements of the law. And that again is a topic of discussion to clear up the language in it.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that legislation is really just a matter of copying and pasting from other people's bills that are similar to that, and then adding your own twist, and it just ends up being a muddied mess of a bill instead of somebody starting from scratch and trying to write it for that particular area. Again, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but
Sure.
I mean, we see that in legislation all the time that you can give it to 10 different people and get 10 different ideas of what the law is trying to describe.
Well, once the law was passed, like I said, I literally had 5 different lawyers look at it, defense lawyers and prosecutors, and got 5 different opinions on what certain citations within the laws meant.
Yeah.
It's again, I'm the sheriff. My job is to enforce the law. It's the law, and I stand behind that. But there's always room for improvement in a lot of different laws, whether it be in Alabama or other places.
Now, to be clear, because we hear this, and I want to get this out just to make sure everybody understands. You ran on a Republican ticket, is that correct?
I did.
Okay. Yeah. And then that's important because I want people to understand that you're not fervently going after gun laws and the gun community and folks like that. Again, I'm not speaking for you, but I mean, typically speaking, that's not going to be the platform that you're going to run on.
Absolutely say that I'm a staunch defender of the Second Amendment. I may or may not have more guns than most people, but, so I believe in the Constitution. I stand up for the Constitution. And, this is by no means, a gun grab or anything like that. I'm just trying to curtail a serious uptick in violent crime that we're seeing in my county.
And to be clear, based on that point, you're not proposing this amendment. And again, to be clear, I don't support what you're trying to do, but I respect the fact that you're trying to do something. And I think it's the wrong thing, to be honest with you, but I respect the fact that you're attempting to alleviate this problem. But you're not naive enough to think that if you suddenly disallow 18 to 20-year-olds to constitutional carry, that somehow the criminals will stop carrying when they're 18 or 20-year-old, right? I mean, you're not that naive.
No, not at all.
Your goal is that you're trying to say that if you want to have a reason to be able, if you see printing of a gun when you pull somebody over who's 17 years old or 18 years old or 19 years old, well, I guess 18, 19, 20 would only apply to them. You want to have your reason to be able to question them because the law wouldn't allow them to carry that gun. You're not thinking they just won't carry because the law doesn't allow them to. You want to have your officer a reason to be able to question that particular guy in that car. Is that correct?
You've made my point for me. And so, yes, I mean, or the bad guys will always do whatever bad guys do to break the law. They don't care what the law is regarding guns, and I know that. But if they're carrying guns, and again, I'm talking, and all this is based on data when we looked at the ages. And so, I kind of lost my train of thought, but no, I'm not naive enough to think that they're going to stop carrying guns, but that is a tool in our toolbox where, we can effectively arrest them, seize the gun. Most of them probably will be stolen. And like I said, I know where my elements around the county are that we're seeing the problems, and that's the ones we're seeking to go after. And if this amendment were to be considered and implemented, and because every whether it's here, Montgomery, Louisiana Parish, or New Orleans Parish, whatever, law enforcement knows where their problems are, and that's the areas you're going to saturate. And anytime you can get a bad guy off the street, especially one that's got bad intentions, it's a win for law enforcement and for the community.
Do you see any of the young people that we might be talking about that are the problem? If there is there anything from a DA standpoint, I guess is what I'm looking at. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Or the DAs in your area, I'm not familiar with the district attorneys in your area. How are they at prosecuting these types of crimes? And let me kind of make my point. If there's a crime and it happens to involve a gun, we see nationwide, especially more of these corrupt DAs or the ones that are very left leaning, that they have a tendency to let people plead down. And usually the gun charge is what's plead away. And they rat out their friends based on that plea. And that's how they get away with that. So we see very few convictions on gun crimes because those are the crimes that are allowed to be plead away. How does your DA handle these types of crimes in that area? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, instead of changing the law, that I'm not in favor of what you're trying to do. Again, if I've not made that clear yet, but is there a way to combat this somewhere else? Could you receive help somewhere else with what you're trying to do if somebody else did their job properly or differently?
There's several answers to that. So let's go back, prior to 22 when permits were required. Even if you were arrested, for having a pistol without a permit, it was simply a fine unless you committed the crime several times, and then you would get a little jail time. Nothing to, be concerned about. But, we do have a very aggressive DA, and, he does aggressively charge and pursue those, and it's primarily convicted felons, who have a possession of firearms, and we take most of those cases federal. And the, I guess, prohibited persons, being 17 and under that are caught with guns, they get locked up, and unless it's a first offense, they might get probation or something. But we have a very, very strong DA when it comes to gun crimes.
And I'm asking this really, if looking at this, if I were a member of your community, if for some reason the amending of this constitutional carry law does not happen, which I've looked at it and I don't think it's going to be changed. I think a lot has to happen,
but it's certainly worth a discussion.
No, I understand. And I respect you for at least attempting to find a way to curtail this crime. So let's say that doesn't happen, because it's likely not to. Do you think there's something else? And again, I'm approaching this as if I lived in Mobile, I would be asking this question. Is there something else we can do? In other words, I don't think this is going to happen. Let's look elsewhere. Do you have any other ideas? Is there a plan B to try to get this crime down and to achieve the kind of things you're wanting to do to get these criminals off the street?
There's not, other than, keep doing what we're doing. When I was elected, I formed a special operations division that's, comprised about 46 deputies, and that includes SWAT guys, K9 guys, narcotics, and then, some, I guess, you call them almost like a task force that, they've got plane vehicles. They can see things that others can't. And I deploy them in different areas of the county. We have partnered with the city recently and identified some of these gang members and known gang members that are in their database. And, we go after them, and we target their little groups, and that's been really successful. But unfortunately, a lot of them are juveniles. And so, they get put on probation 2 and 3 times. And there is a gang statute in Alabama that was just passed last year, but it's got some really, really hard to meet elements to it. And, we're working toward being able to charge some of those, as gang member under that as an enhanced penalty. But, there is no real plan B other than to keep doing what we're doing. we have been successful at getting some of these people, but and your viewers would know is when it comes to criminals, as soon as you can lock one up, there's 10 more coming up behind them.
Right. Right. Well, Sheriff, I commend you on I think you genuinely care about the community, and I commend you on that. Again, we will agree to disagree on the amending of the law. Doesn't mean that you're wrong in what your goals are and what you're trying to do. I've long been, I've always felt like once constitutional carry was allowed to be implemented, it should have been already. It just simply recognizes a constitutional right. It doesn't give those people that right now. It's a right that they already had that's finally recognized by the state. And that's just how I feel. I don't believe in classism. And I will say this, just to your comment about the gangs. I don't agree with classism and additional or heavier penalties either way, lighter or heavier penalties. I don't agree with a certain class of people not having, you mentioned military. I think most of the viewers that I have are probably more trained with firearms and safer and more responsible than probably 90% of the military out there. So I don't believe in that type of classism. I also don't believe in, if somebody's in a gang, that they should have a stronger penalty. Now, I understand your challenge. What I'm saying is, to me, if you committed a crime, that whatever the heaviest weight of the law you can levy at that person, I think should be levied at them, regardless of whether or not they were in a super special club like a gang or not. I understand that the intent is to liquefy the gangs and get them to go away. I understand that's why you have that particular type of class law for a gang member, to give them an additional charge or a heavier penalty or whatever. But I feel like, as Americans operating under the Constitution, that anybody who has not committed a crime is not a criminal, and they should have all their constitutional rights afforded to them. And that's just me. And I think a lot of other people feel that way. You have a different set of challenges. I understand that. You're responsible for the safety of a community. And I would like to think that if I were in your shoes, I would think the same way that I think. Maybe I wouldn't. You know what I mean? Maybe if it's my job now to do the things you're doing, I would approach things differently. But I do think your heart is in the right place, and I respect you for at least looking out there. That's why I asked about the plan B. If there's not going to be a way for you to get at least the conversation going about amending the constitutional carry, then my question would be, all right, well, we can't just give up because we're not going to get that. What do we do now? Sounds like you guys, or at least the squads and teams you're putting together, is a step in that direction.
Well, and I'll tell you what would probably change your opinion if you were in my boots is when you have to go visit the family of a 4-year-old who was killed by shooting into a house by gang members because they were trying to shoot another gang member, or killing, we just had 2 weeks ago, a 67-year-old woman lying in bed, shot and killed by gang members shooting it out. And, I guess this has been maybe 2 years ago, a woman literally on her knees in church was killed by rival gang members shooting at each other. So that changes your perspective on what protection means for the community.
Yeah. And I mean, I respect that. I respectfully disagree. I don't think that would still make me think that I could disenfranchise a whole subset of people who aren't doing anything wrong as a result of that. I
was speaking more toward the gang when you said as far as classism and
I got you
going after gangs.
I follow you.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, Sheriff, I appreciate you coming on, talking to me. A lot of people have emailed me, some in the Alabama community, some outside the state, and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And I thought the best way to do it was not to take news reports and make my own decision on what you think. I felt like it'd be better to have you on. And I certainly appreciate you coming on here and giving me your side of it and talking to me about everything in the area.
Absolutely. And if I could just close with, I respect everyone's opinions. We don't have to agree on everything, and we may have different opinions, but I respect your opinion. And, all humans aren't going to agree on everything.
Right. Well, thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate you coming on.
Yes, sir.
So, friends, I hope you all enjoyed that. And thanks again for the sheriff for sitting down with me. I thought that was a reasonable thing for him to do, even though we disagree wholeheartedly on this topic. I do think he's searching for something to do to correct the crime in his area. And my hat's off to him for that. This is definitely not in my opinion, the right way to go about it, by limiting other people's constitutional rights. So that's why I pressed him on a plan B. And if there's another thing he can consider to possibly reach the goals that he's looking at to reduce crime in those areas. So have any questions, please email me, Paul at Legally Owned America. And please, guys, make sure you are still subscribed, and please share the video if you get a chance.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.